Please note that this series contains stories of violence, assault, suicide, and suicide attempts that some people may find disturbing. Names and places have been changed for privacy. Listener discretion is advised.
Really, our family has had hardly any deaths. My Uncle Sam was in World War I. He was a sailor and died at sea. He was 19 years old. My cousin, who's the same age as me, was killed by a drunk driver in Manitoba. He was 15. There were a bunch of kids walking down the street, but he was the only one that died. The next to die was a grandparent, Grandpa, in 2001, or 2000, and then 6 months later, Grandma died, so not long after. It's all that I remember, and it's all my siblings remember. My brother, not my sister, she won't remember. She never ever noticed anything. My brother would scare us all the time, but sometimes he would be scared and be like, "That wasn't me." So you don't really know which were him and which weren't. We always go back thinking, like, who would be with us in a ghost way? Like, who would be following me? We just assumed the house itself was haunted, but we didn't know why. I always go back to the original house being built, which I think it was built in 1905. It was built and burnt down in the same year. Somebody left a candle on. The area of the city was becoming more business and less residential, and my great-grandfather thought, well, we're too close to the city, we're farmers, we gotta get further out. So then they ended up going where they were on the south of the city, which was, at that time, was way far out. When I talked to my parents, I said, I think I'll be meeting with Curtis and talking about things that happened. And Mom said, oh, okay. And I said, so you're sure nobody died in the house? And she was like, no, nobody died in the house. Well, there was a suicide in the trailer. Pardon me? So there was a troubled kid who needed some help, and my aunt and uncle had this trailer that they had lived in on the farm before they built a house on the property. So there was a trailer, and the kid one afternoon went into the trailer and shot himself with one of our guns, one of my grandparents' guns. So my first childhood memory of something I knew wasn't real, but, would be real. My brother and I shared a room. I would have been like 5, maybe 4. I remember we had an old 1.5-story character house, and I remember 3 figures coming up the stairs. I was in my bedroom, but I remember seeing them come up the stairs. That's the earliest thing I remember. I remember my parents complaining about the music coming from the attic. There were, what are those old things people used to put in corners? One of those big horn phones with like a record player on them? All the time from in the attic. The attic didn't have access. There was a covered hole in the ceiling. You couldn't actually get up there. And so she would hear that music and she would come up and check on us, and we would all be asleep. We would hear things all the time from the attic, but you always think somebody else is scaring you, so that's why as a kid, I didn't think haunting, I just thought weird stuff, right? There was a room in the basement. We had a cold room, which was dirt, and then we had another room the former owners had forgotten to put a door on, so it had been cemented in, like it was a cold room as well, but it had been cemented in, and it had to be chipped out because the morons put cement all the way around it, so they had to create the door. So it was like a cell. When you went downstairs, it was a terrifying basement. It was just horrible. I fell down a flight of stairs once. That same flight of stairs I saw the people coming up, I fell down from the top to the bottom, so 1.5 stories. I wasn't hurt one bit. I was stood up at the very end, like I didn't even fall on the ground. I came out and was standing at the end. I felt like I didn't hit anything and I didn't hurt anywhere. I was 8 or 7. We got on our snowmobiles. I was 9, and we would go around all the fields in the pitch dark. And I can remember I lost my brother, and there's patches of trees, and I'm on a path, and I turn, and I can see there's a pack of wolves. So I U-turned, and I can remember looking back, and they were after me. Holy hell. We had, what year, 80s? I wasn't at our elementary school yet. And a train went by and threw off a spark, and the field was dry, and the whole field went up, and we had to evacuate the farm. Mom had to get the horses out. It was terrifying. We were playing, and we just saw a fire. It burned everything, and it came right up to our house, but the fire department stopped it before the house. When we were kids, we had hamsters and guinea pigs, and we had 2 hamsters, and we had their cages in my room. My girlfriend Jenny came over for a sleepover, and she was terrified of hamsters. She said, "I can't sleep in a room with hamsters. They're so scary to me." And I said, "Okay, well, my sister has 2 beds in her room. You can just sleep in my sister's room." Okay, that's fine. So Jenny and my sister go to bed in her room, and I went to bed in my room. We closed both doors, my door and my sister's door. We always did at night. Can't remember my parents' reason why, but we closed both doors. I think it was fire-wise. It was in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden I wake up, and Jenny is in my room screaming her head off, and she has the covers from her bed gathered in her arms, and she's screaming and she's saying, they're in here, you gotta get them out." And then she screams again, and she dropped down to the ground, and she was screaming. My mom and my dad came running, and they're like, "What the hell is going on?" So the hamsters, there's a book on top of the hamster cage just in case they do try to. So they would have had to move the book, got out, got down from the dresser, both doors had to have been opened, climbed up onto her bed, and bit Jenny. I remember my mom saying, "How the fuck?" And she swore, and we were all like, that was the weirdest thing. Jenny would never stay over again. They never blamed anyone else. They never said anything. They never made big deals about it. Growing up, my parents weren't. They came to our stuff, but we never played ball with them. We were very be seen, not heard, like, very 80s parents. 5 p.m., you're outside playing by yourself. They never blamed anyone else. Other things would happen that could have been kids as well, like shoved cotton balls down the sink filled up and overflowed. Who did it? Who did it? None of us. We would all get spankings. I remember when Anne ran away to our house because her mom is a horrible person. We all know now that Anne was a horrible kid, but she came to our house and stayed in our barn attic. She lit a fire to stay warm at night. My parents went up there one night to shovel hay down and found a fire and was like, "Our whole barn could have gone up. Who's out there?" I don't know, but it was Anne staying out there with Tessa. She was troubled. They had both ran away from home. I remember going to Tessa's house once, and she was like, "This is how you fake suicide." And she was cutting up her wrists, and I was like, "Ooh, this is awkward." I had a 3-way mirror. Remember the thing you could call Bloody Mary on a 3-way mirror? So my grandma had in her possession a 3-way mirror, so she gave it to me. It was green and it was old. I would sit there and I would tell the mirror, "Bloody Mary," 3 times. Nothing ever happened. I don't know why, but I would stay there for a long time looking at myself in the 3-way mirror, thinking, this is the way to bring things in. It was a lot. A lot of it was field, maybe 40 to 100 acres. Straight across was our grandparents' house. There was an old house where my aunt and uncle had lived in, and then it was vacant, and you couldn't even get up in there to check it out. Lots of odd buildings and a barn. So there was a lot of farm. The other side was the neighbors, and they had different houses. There was one old house that's actually still standing. It was a really creepy house. I'm not kidding, it was probably a 3,000 square foot house. Back in those days, that was massive.
Sarah still refers to the 2 main properties as the greenhouse and the beige house. She was in the 7th grade when her grandparents moved out of the greenhouse and into a condo in the city. Sarah's mom immediately moved the family from the beige house into the greenhouse because it had air conditioning. During the transition period, Sarah questions another bizarre memory.
I remember going downstairs in the greenhouse one day. Grandma still lived there. I came over and Grandma wasn't there. And I went downstairs and I opened the door that ended up being my brother's room when we moved into it. I opened the door and I remember seeing maple bugs. They covered everything. You couldn't see anything. They were just in that room and they covered every inch. I closed the door and I remember thinking, am I seeing this? I opened it again and it was like a scene out of a horror movie. I closed the door and I left. I don't know if I told my mom, but they never got an exterminator. That was just the weirdest thing. You couldn't even see the furniture. That's how covered everything was.
All right, let's go back to the first elementary school Halloween party you had.
Yes, the party. I remember the beige house being vacant. Oh, yes, they had tried to rent it out, but no one was renting it yet. So Mom was like, yeah, you can have your Halloween party there, because it was already spooky.
One memory that has just stuck with me for years was at the night of the party. I remember Sarah's mom coming in, looking really distraught, but trying not to, and very seriously asking us if anyone had gone upstairs in that house. And we all had said no, because we hadn't. The party was in the main level. And I always just remember the tension of her mother asking that question. So I actually remembered to ask Sarah about this after the fact, and this is what she texted me.
Burn marks. After my Halloween party, my mom found burn marks on the carpet upstairs in the beige house. She knew we weren't upstairs because they watched from the greenhouse for the lights. Upstairs lights on meant we went upstairs. We were told we were under no circumstances to go upstairs. She already knew when she came over to lock up after us, we were never upstairs.
Wait, I remember that last one we had. We were all in grade 9, and we came back and we just hung out in the basement there.
And that was in the new house. People were renting the other house, and they had the same issues as us. Music coming from the attic, doors and whispers. They would hear bangs in the middle of the night. Mom was honest with them. Yeah, we've heard the same thing, but never enough to make them move. I can't expand because I don't know them anymore, but they agreed on everything we said about the house. I remember them calling Mom and saying, we're hearing music at night. And so Mom kinda owned up to it, and they were like, whatever. They had cheap rent. It was dirt cheap. So they stayed because it was close to the city. One day I was home. I was by myself in the new greenhouse. Somebody came to the door, and it was a man, and he was very gaunt looking. There was a woman standing outside of his vehicle, and they were just standing there. So it was really creepy, and I opened the door, and he stayed down away from me. And I peeked my head out, and he was like, yeah, our car is running out of gas. We can barely make it. Or it ran out of gas. I remember the car. He's like, do you guys have any gas? It's a farm. I was like, there's a gas tank over there. But at the same time, I didn't drive yet. I don't even know, 13 maybe? I said, well, there's a gas tank over there. You can, I guess, go get gas. I didn't realize my parents locked the gas tank for literally that reason. So they left, and I went back in the house. And a few minutes later, when my sister and my parents came home, I said, oh, by the way, some people came by who ran out of gas, so I told them where the gas tank was. And my mom was like, okay, the gas tank is locked. And I was like, well, they're gone. And my mom was like, well, we didn't pass any vehicles. So many things like that. Like when we lived in the greenhouse, I remember looking out the window and seeing a vehicle, shoved into the woods. Well, there was a vehicle stolen and a girl was raped and they found the vehicle. And if I can remember correctly, she was in the vehicle or her stuff was in the vehicle, so the police ended up finding it. I had a friend in grade 9. I wasn't really friends with him for very long, but he went to my high school, and he would come out and he had a motorbike sort of thing. He asked me if it would be okay if he could go biking on our property and follow the railroad tracks. Yeah, sure. He came back and he said he had found a truck There's just a truck sitting by the road, and in the truck is a note, and it looks like a suicide note. So we called the police again, and the police came out, and sure enough, the owner of the truck had hung himself in our trees in the back by the railroad tracks. There's also stuff that Vanessa knows because she saw it. We would drive around and lights would go out. We always assumed it was her, but there's a light outside my parents' house that would always go out.
Although I don't discuss this at the time, I remember hearing a story back in high school about Sarah and Vanessa witnessing a car, driving through a moving train, it disappeared as it went through. I heard this story actually from Vanessa back in high school.
We told you about the graveyard. Me and Vanessa and 2 other friends went out to the old graveyard in the winter. Could have been October. There was snow on the ground and it was hard. We were all standing in a big semicircle, and Vanessa said something like, "Should we call up the ghosts?" And right in front of us, 3 footsteps. Boom, boom. We all, at the same time, just ran. It was terrifying to see it happen in front of us. It's dark, but there are some lights, and your eyes adjust. But we all saw it. We were in grade 11. That was basically all I remember in the houses growing up, and it wasn't... To me, that wasn't very big. That wasn't very much. It wasn't until I moved out that things got really bad.